Now, I don't want you to be disappointed, but I want to say two things. I'm going to make the workshop specific into single camera handheld hyperstereos, no slide bars, no twin cameras, and also I'm going to put a lot of emphasis on taking those using the Fuji camera. The reason for that is the Fuji camera has some functions that make this handheld taking of hyper or hypostereos easier and more fun. And I suspect that any future stereo camera will also have the same features. They're very useful. So I'm going to put emphasis in that. However, the basic principles apply on taking hyperstereos with any camera, film or digital. And the emphasis in this workshop is also on digital. With this in mind, I want to dedicate the workshop to Paul Wing. How many of you in this room knew Paul? Raise your hands. Okay, Paul passed away a couple of years ago. He was a real legend in our field, a tall guy, very imposing, and he always had strong opinions about things, and he didn't mind expressing them. So in an article in Stereo World, Hyperstereos was an area of interest and specialty. He did many things. In 1989, he wrote an article in Stereo World called Hypers by Walk, Water, Wire, and Wing. And he made this statement. He says that pictures of our travels can be sprinkled with a few white-based views, and these are fun to make and fascinating to view, and I fully agree with this statement. And I will also add, in addition to the white base, consider narrow base, and that will make a nice addition to your pictures. And then he continues and he says you can make this using your trusty stereo camera, but it's easier to make them with a full 35mm camera, preferably with automatic field transport and one of the newer compact zoom lenses. Now he wrote that back in 1989, and it's true today if you're shooting film. And for over 20 years, when I travel, I always take with me, in addition to my stereo camera, one single camera for the exclusive purpose of taking single camera stereos. However, starting in October, I was kind of forced to be introduced to digital photography when I bought my Fuji 3D camera. I was given to try it, then I started talking the idea of buying one. I bought it, and once I tried that, my passion for hyperstereos or hypostereos has taken a new turn. Now, first of all, some of you may be new in this room and say, what is he talking about, hypostereo? Normally, in a normal stereo, the spacing of the lenses of the camera that take the stereo pair are about equal to the spacing of the eyes. I call this normal stereo. But in addition to that, and I do that 99% of the time, if you make the spacing of the taking lenses much wider than the spacing of the eyes, you have a hyperstereo. If you make it much smaller than the spacing of the eyes, you have a hypostereo. Now, you can use, all that you need is one camera to do that, and there are some advantages, good results from a small investment. The matches are matched because you're using the same camera. You're very flexible. You can move, a few millimeters or several feet apart with one camera. However, there are certain limitations, and you need to know that you are limited to stationary objects. If something moves while you are trying to take your pair, this will ruin your stereo pair. Then it requires to pay attention to alignment. You just can't move around and start pointing to different areas in the picture. You have to try to make those two pictures align while you take them. And as a method for taking stereo pictures, it has a high reflex ratio. However, thanks to digital photography, those two factors that were a big problem with film, they're less of a problem with digital. And that's my next point. Digital photography has an advantage. Two advantages, basically. The first is that experimentation virtually costs nothing. It only costs your time. And second, misalignments, if you don't have your two pictures perfectly aligned, you can correct them later with software. So that's why I'm suggesting, now this method of taking stereos with one camera is imperfect, and it's based mainly on trial and error. The success ratio is low. Aligning the pairs can be time consuming. But if you do it digitally, I know people that take, you can take hundreds of pictures and then only keep the ones that worked out and then use the software to align them. Even if you work with film, you like to look at your slides in a viewer, I would suggest try taking Hyperstereos with a digital camera and then selecting your best pairs, the ones that work, align them digitally and then transfer them to film later. I think that will work better than shooting everything in film. It will be too expensive. Now, let's talk about the Fuji here. It has two advantages in my mind. First, there is no need to carry a separate stereo camera and a single camera, since the same camera will do both functions. And the second advantage, it has built-in functions that we'll explore in a second that make this taking of Hyperstereos easier, and you are able to see the results immediately. Now, at the end of this presentation, I know some people will say, wait, anything that the Fuji can do, you can do with one digital camera. Yes, this is true. But I'm going to ask you, how many times do you really do it? If it's more fun and more enjoyable and you're able to see the results right there, you will be more motivated to do it all the time. It will be in the back of your mind to switch the modes on the camera and try Hyperstereo. Okay, so now I'm going to mention some specific how to do that using the Fuji camera. Okay? One of the modes, when you press the button that I circled there on the red on the left, will bring you this menu. It says Advanced 3D. That's where you need to go. Normally I shoot most of my stereo pairs in automatic mode, so by pressing the up arrow, I'm down to Advanced 3D. If you go in Advanced 3D, you have two options. One is called Interval 3D, and the other is called Individual Shutter 3D mode. Next. This individual shutter is what we normally know as the cha-cha stereo, where you take one picture, you move, you take the second picture. Now, Fuji brings two innovations into this whole process. The first is you see an outline of your first picture. So when you take your first picture in this advanced 3D individual shutter mode, you take your first picture, as you start moving, you still see the first picture as an outline shadow and the second picture that you're composing at this time. So you're able to align the second picture now to match the outline of the first. So you can use this outline as a guide to position the camera better in terms of alignment for the second shot. Some people claim that they can even get some information relating to amount of depth in the scene, because once you have the two in the same screen, you can see how much displacement there is. Okay, so before you take the second picture, you can align the camera and get an idea of the depth. And the second big advantage is this instant preview. The minute you shoot the second picture, a second later, the camera combines these two pictures in one 3D picture that you can see right there. So if you've done a mistake, if you think there's too little depth or too much depth, you're looking at it. You don't have to go home and download the picture in another software or involve a computer to see it. Now these are nice features, and that's why I'm amazed that Fuji thought of all those things when they made their camera. And I think now they're putting pressure to the next camera manufacturer to have similar functions because they're really useful for us. This interval mode is useful when you are in what I call a moving platform, which can be any moving vehicle like an aeroplane. The difference here is this. After you take the first picture, there is a certain delay, and the camera automatically will take the second picture. You don't have to press the button the second time around. That makes the process a little bit more precise, because you can set the time interval from minimum 1 second, 1.5, 2, 3, 5, and 10 seconds. Now the minimum is not really 0, it's 0.8 seconds. That's as fast as the camera will take 2 pictures. So you're sitting in an airplane window, and you set for 1 second. So after you press the button the first time, the camera will wait for 1 second, it automatically will take the second picture. All you need is to concentrate on your display, so you don't move the camera. I have found that if the plane is cruising above the clouds, 5-second interval works. If things are moving, you're closer to the clouds or the ground, then you have to go closer to the minimum actually. Something else that Fuji allows you to do is to switch the order of the pairs. By default, it takes the left picture first, the right picture next. But you can change this. You can ask the camera to take the right first, the left next. And why would you want to do that? Yes, that's correct. Remember this is very easy to remember. If you're sitting on the right side of the plane, take the right picture first, okay? If you're on the left side of the plane, take the left picture first. Now I'm going to ask you another question. What happens if you do the opposite? On the right side of the plane, take the left picture first.
All of your projected orders are automatically cross-eyed.
Your image will be pseudo. The only problem with this is you won't be able to preview it in the screen because the camera doesn't have an option to switch right away.
Pseudo's been mentioned 3 or 4 times.
What does pseudo mean?
What is pseudo, please?
You don't know that?
I don't.
Okay. Did you miss the beginners? Well, okay, pseudo means in a stereo pair there's a right picture for the right eye and picture for the left. Now if you take the right picture, put the left eye and the left picture to the right eye, this is a pseudo. The depth is inverted. Whatever is close appears to be back. Now if that makes sense, you're going to see it. If it doesn't make like a face, you can never see it inverted, then you'll be totally confused. So that's what pseudo is. Now, but you can go home, right, and load Stereo Photo Maker, press a button, and turn them around. So it's not the end of the world. It's just that you are losing the preview advantage. That's the only thing. There's another situation, though, more important than this. The one I illustrate there. If there's something moving into the scene, and things that can move are the clouds. So here I'm going to ask you, if you have clouds, very slowly, though, but they do move, from left to the right, what's better to do? Take the left picture first, and then the right, or the other way around? What's better?
Right picture.
Right, go against the movement of the clouds, is that what you're saying? Why?
Because what happens is you're simulating you moving from right to left, not the clouds moving from left to right.
Anybody else? What do you think?
I think if the clouds are moving from left to right in general, if there's something that the clouds are going behind, you should
Yes,
take
this is the correct answer. Here's what's happening. If you move the direction of the clouds, you're going to push the clouds back. If you move against the direction of the clouds, you're going to push them forward. Now, the pushing forward is dangerous because if the clouds are behind a tree or a mountain, then it will appear physically in front. That doesn't make sense. So you're going to ruin your pair. So the safe way is to go with the movement of the clouds. But if the clouds do not have anything in front of them, you can do that and actually make a more interesting effect where now the clouds are, really close and over the scene.
Hey, George, I never remember that, so I take a left, a right, and a left.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Yes?
It doesn't help if the clouds are coming toward you or going away, though.
Pardon?
It doesn't help if the clouds are coming toward you or going away.
That's a big problem, yeah. So here's a case where you might want to switch the order of the picture. That will affect your stereo pair. You cannot go home and change it, it's ruined to start. And that's happened to me.
I was shooting the full moon at 2400mm lens on my camera, and basically the clouds were moving, so I just sat there, took a shot of the moon,
Yeah.
waited 10 seconds, the clouds moved, took a second shot, beautiful stereo pair, never moved.
Yeah, actually, there's a technique where you use a single camera and don't move it at all, and the clouds move, and then the clouds are in stereo.
I've done that during a solar eclipse.
Yes, common way to put depth in astronomical subjects. Now, here's the very important question. Every beginner will ask the same age-old question, and they have a lot of anxiety. They will say, how much should I shift the car? I told you, you take a picture, you move, how much should you move? Well, this is what Paul Wing said. He says there are mathematical geniuses out there that can tell you all those formulas and calculations, but they will never show you a good picture of a hyperstereo. And he says in real life, you just make it simple. You try and you learn from your mistakes. So basically what he's saying is, the first bullet, take your chances. Take your chances. Well, I'll give you some, not just take your chances randomly. There are some things you need to know about. But after you've done it for a long time, like I have, basically I take my chances. I know what's going on and pretty much I get it right. Now, there are calculations, and one rule of thumb is the second line. This is a very safe rule. If you know the distance to the nearest object, you just move 1/30 to this distance. So, how would you know the distance of the nearest object? Well, you can guess. There are rangefinders, laser rangefinders you can buy if you really want to measure things. But if you do that, you're guaranteed to have a nice stereo pair. Now there are more extensive formulas that you need to tell them where the near point is, the far point is, the focal length of the lens, and how much depth you want to see in your pair, and then they will tell you exactly how much you should move, okay? If you want to do it that precise. And a final fourth technique is, if you are able to measure actually the deviation, do you know what deviation means? Or what?
My first one.
When you have a stereo pair, the foreground and the background are shifted. If you can measure the shift, then you actually stop when you get enough deviation, then you're done. So you see, just measure the damn thing instead of trying to calculate it. So these are the 4 basic techniques. Now, I'm going to skip this, but I just want to, if you want to do stereophotography by precision, you can do a lot of measurements and a lot of things accurately. The question is, will your pictures look better than mine? I don't know about that, because it's, well, here what I'm saying is, if you use the Fuji camera, again, it will assist you to take this hyperstereo in 2 ways. Regarding the question how much to see. One, as I said, since you see the 2 pictures outlined, it's possible to actually measure the amount of parallax or deviation on the pair. And I give some recommendations. For me, this is not very practical. And as you are moving like that in the field, the longer you wait, the chances are that your subject, you will ruin the picture. You have to do this process rather quickly, so you don't have time to really study your display, take a rule or whatever. You have to do it fast. So for me, this doesn't work. Some people claim that they use this method actually. They see the pictures overlapping and they can tell how much the deviation is. The preview though, there's a guy that said, the first one works for me, the preview doesn't work for me. The preview works for me because when I look at the pair, you need to calibrate your mind because you are looking in a very little screen. Eventually you will learn how this deviation in this little screen translates to when you project in a large screen, if that's your final purpose, okay? So just by looking at the screen, you can tell if you have too much depth, and that's usually the mistake a beginner will make. So what can go wrong if you guess? 2 things. Too little, really the picture is flat, you should have moved a mile away, or too much. Now, between those 2 extremes, believe it or not, there is a lot of ground for great stereo pictures. That's not a very critical variable in my opinion. And if you're in doubt, I think you should go for less and be conservative. That's my personal recommendation. And if you really are very unsure or you really have to get it right, then you can bracket the stereo base. Instead of taking just 2, take 10 and then look at them in different pairs and decide which pair works best for you. Okay, let's talk a little bit about alignment. I mentioned that if you use film, alignment was a big headache, but now with digital it's not. However, even with digital, there are mistakes you can make that cannot be corrected. I want to tell you about those mistakes, and the first one is a question that everybody asks: should I keep the camera parallel or should I converge to the object as I move? Well, we used to say you should always keep the camera, the lenses parallel. Look at the left side because you have no distortion. You're going to lose a little bit of the edges of your picture, but there's no distortion. However, if you converge, you're not going to lose any image, but you get this what's called differential keystone distortion, where the right side of the right image is bigger than the right side of the left image, so they don't match. Things match only at the center. As you go to the edges, there is a mismatch. However, I have good news for you. Here's the good news, that keystone distortion can be corrected digitally. At first, I didn't believe that. I thought that this cannot be a general statement. Now, some people disagree with me. I'm convinced that all keystone conversion and distortion can be removed digitally. So go ahead and convert the camera.
Does SPM correct it?
I think so. People are doing it all the time. Yes?
When you do your convergence, remember you got a background, and don't get that.
Well, there are people that claim that the background is not a problem. You can, even if you sit them parallel, you can have a problem with the background. Anyway, there's a lot of discussion going on, and people have different theories. Now, this one can be a problem. This here situation here. When you take your first picture, you should move parallel to your object. If I take the picture and then I come closer to you and I take another one, I've made a big mistake. Why? A mistake that cannot be corrected digitally. Okay, that's the real mistake. Because when I change my distance to the subject, this guy here in the second picture will appear larger, and the guy at the end, he will retain the same size. So now I have a difference in size depending on distance. Well, stereophoto maker cannot correct this because he has to know the distances in order to make this correction. Now, a practical situation is when you take hyperstereos out of an aeroplane window. You look out of the window, and all of a sudden you see, wow, look at those nice clouds over there, right? So you turn the camera at an angle. So now the plane is moving, basically, and it's going to change the distance to your object. You have to keep it perpendicular to the window. Don't try to go like that. Well, what's going to happen if you try? Maybe nothing bad will happen, your picture will look great. But generally, you're introducing an error that cannot be corrected. Just to let you know. You can tilt the camera up and down, there's no problem with this, when things are moving, the plane, up and down, but not sideways. And the last one is what happens if there is a gain or loss of elevation. In other words, I take a picture of you, and then I go down the stairs, I take another picture of you. That's a problem, and this problem, when the plane is actually landing or taking off, by the way, at this point they tell you to turn off all electronic devices, right? So you shouldn't be taking any pictures. You know what you can do? If you put the camera like this and try and rotate the camera to follow what you think the trajectory of the plane is. If the plane is going up, you turn it like this. And you look in the picture. If a fair object doesn't move vertically, that means you have your camera perfectly aligned to the trajectory of the plane. You should take the pair like this. This way, you have minimum error. If you still keep the camera horizontally, then you have to rotate your pictures to match the direction of the plane. Stereophoto maker will not do this for you. You can try and do it, okay? Now here's the bottom line. Those errors, I described at least 2 errors that you cannot correct digitally. If they are small, nobody will notice them, okay? And also many errors are proportional to the amount of depth, in the sense that more depth equals more error. So the bottom line is, it helps again to be conservative. If you don't have excessive depth, if you put excessive depth, then every error will be magnified too. Here are some practical tips. Aeroplane hyperstereos, I don't know how many of you fly often for trips and stuff like that. I love them because, you know, here's this plane moving and you see the ground, the clouds, there's so many things you can shoot in hyperstereo. But certain things, the preparation starts when you reserve your seats in the plane. Now, what's the best location in the plane to be sitting? Is the front, to avoid the wing, okay? Why do I need to avoid the wing? Why?
Foreground's a bitch. Everything else is.
Yes, if you have the wing into the picture and you try to take a hyperstereo of the clouds, this will be a big problem. It doesn't fit into the picture. Now there are certain people that claim, pay attention, they claim that you can actually have both the ground or the clouds and the wing in proper stereo in the same picture without any Photoshop or anything like this. You know what? I asked those people, show me a picture where, you know, somebody has done that. It's true in theory that it can be done. It requires that you put not too much depth in the ground and you move your camera a lot to put a lot of depth in the wing. So to do those times at the same time, the window is very narrow. So you really can, for practical reasons, you cannot do this. So you want to avoid the wing altogether. Now, why shouldn't you sit in the back of the plane instead of the front? Why is the front better than the back? Right, the exhaust, I mean, it will distort your picture, a big problem. So if you have a choice, to the front. So the next question is, right or left side? Does it make a difference?
Depends whether you're flying east, west.
Right, exactly. Depends where you want the sun to be. Do you want the sun to be right in your window and all the cracks in the window all of a sudden are glowing and you can't do anything? It's safer if it's on the other side. However, if it's a nice sunset, you know, you can photograph a sunset if you have the, well, the best is to have open seats and jump from one side to the other. You reserve 2 seats in opposite directions. That would be the best. Well, now, you're hoping to get a clean window. I mean, if the window is dirty from the outside, make sure before you get in the plane, you go outside and you wipe it off. But you can clean the window inside because little kids, you know, they stick their fingers, their nose, I don't know how often they clean them. Bring a little cleaner with you to clean the window. Now, you have to use high shutter speed, lens shades, why? Or bring, if your camera, like the Fuji doesn't have lens shade, bring the lens as close to the window as possible because there are things reflected from this window, and if you don't have it flash the lens to the window, you will see those reflections. You can warm up by taking hyperstereos of the planes on the ground. Now, one time I was doing this with this complicated twin film camera rig, and I saw the pilot looking at me. 5 minutes later, security comes. I mean, normally, that's the only time I have the problem. They don't mind. But I guess the pilot saw a guy holding some strange things in his hand. So security comes, you know, what's going on? I'm taking pictures of planes. Why? I said, why are you taking pictures of the plane? I said, well, because I like taking pictures of the plane. And it so happened, I have an accent, and I was living in the United States. I said, what do you do for a living? I'm a self-employed. I have a laptop transmitting, you know, secrets to terrorists. So I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to get out of here. But in 5 minutes, they did the security clearance. It checked, and they say, yeah, you can go.
If you're shooting the old antiquated film stuff, you got to remember, it's still sunny 16, even at 50,000 feet. I have
Yes.
my Nikon silicon blue cells reacted very nicely to the bounced UV off the clouds. Tremendously underexposed, a great hyperstereo of Yosemite. It was a beautiful shot, screwed it up on exposure. So, like I said, sunny 16.
I normally use automatic exposure if the camera
Automatic
has it.
is, well, you can fix it in digital, but if you were 3 stops underexposed on slide film, it's pretty much better.
Well, now, I mentioned for the plane, this interval 3D mode works quite well. You can experiment with the time. As I said, if the plane is far away from any, the 5 seconds, you know, works pretty good. Otherwise, you need shorter times. Now, do you need to worry about filters with digital photography? Well, you know, the hyperstereos, they have low contrast, they have, you know, a lot of haze, so polarizing filters help. Sometimes they interfere with the window. I think in digital, basically, you can process those later. Okay, I wouldn't worry about trying to use filters. And then, remember of this possibility. You know, it's possible to take hyperstereos of the clouds from the ground, from a car. You're traveling, your wife is driving, of course. You look out the window, it's these beautiful clouds. You just take the camera, take the first picture, let the car move a little bit, and you can experiment how much. Take the next one. Then you will get a hyperstereo of the clouds from the ground. Other than the aeroplane, what else do you have out there? Look what Paul Wink says. He says, every day when the air is calm, I think hyper. Okay, and I want you to think the same way. Now, why does he say when the air is calm? Why did he put this?
So the trees aren't.
Now, what happens if the air is not calm?
The trees aren't.
Right. A lot of things will move, the trees, the leaves. So next time, before you take a picture, think, will a hyperstereo work here? Maybe yes, no, or a hypostereo. Now, with the Fuji, it's easy to experiment, right? And whatever, you know, you get instant feedback, whatever doesn't work, you just discard it and you learn a lesson. Now, the moving objects, as I said, is the biggest enemy of the single camera hyperstereos. Small movements can be tolerated if things are far away. Take a picture of a mountain, the leaves are moving, but who can see those? So, but if you have people or moving traffic, you have a problem. But you have many subjects left. Nature without the wind, buildings, statues, architectural details, high-rise overviews. That's one of my favorites. Whenever I have a chance to go high somewhere, like in a building or at the top of Acropolis overlooking Athens, the first thing I think, wow, look at this view I have. So now I can take a picture, move, take another picture. I can have a good stereo pair. Yes?
You might mention, George, there's a way of dealing with the moving objects. Probably most people here know this, but you can actually, in your stereo pair, you can actually clone an object from the left side to the right side.
See,
you do it very carefully, why you can solve the problem.
this is advanced techniques now. Maybe you think a lot of people, I don't know how to do that. I mean, maybe I want to learn, yes. That would be nice to eliminate those distractions. Thanks. Now, everything was about hyperstereos. How about hypostereo? As we said, the hypostereo is a stereo pair where the base is smaller than the spacing of the eyes. Well, when do you need to do that? Now, with the Fuji, a 77 millimeter separation of the lens. That's quite wide. Many times when you take a close-up, even though close-ups work surprisingly well with the Fuji, I didn't expect this, sometimes you still wish, you know, if the subject has too much depth, you wish you had a smaller spacing of the lenses. Some examples, you have nature close-ups of non-moving objects. You have, the thing I like is objects in display. Did you go around the hotel? Did you see they have those masks and stuff behind displays? You can practice hypostereos where you stick your camera in the display and then make a shorter movement of the camera. You have a hypostereo. Actually, that's an insect I saw in New Orleans in the Museum of Insects, Insectarium. I don't know if you knew that such a thing existed. Anyway, they had those insects there, so I put my camera on the display. I'm very close, just a few inches away. One tip is if you have the Fuji, you can put in macro mode where it really focuses close. And then I took the first picture, I just moved a little bit. I took the second, and that worked beautifully, and I wouldn't have captured this without this ability.
Hey George, I've got a tip for anybody, because a lot of what we're talking about is shooting through glass, and you know the Fuji doesn't have the capability of a lens shade. So I've had good success in cupping my hands as completely as I can around the camera, so you can get your hands right against the glass and eliminate all those reflections.
Sometimes I do that in airplanes. I see the reflection, then I try. I say, "Where is this
Yeah.
coming from?" I put my hands to block it.
Yeah, and on the airplane, make sure you're not wearing like a white shirt.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, if you wear white clothes, then you will see your own reflections in the window. So it's
They used
better
to give you
to dress
blankets,
black.
and you could use that, but they don't do that anymore.
Yes, of course,
Still really attracts attention.
Another advantage of the sticking your camera in the window is now you can use lower shutter speeds. You're using the window as a tripod. You know, you just press the camera there, and you can use slower shutter speeds that you could not normally use if you didn't have any support at all. Okay, well, what time is it?
1:34.
Oh, we have plenty of time. Listen, I have 15 stereo pairs, but it will take a little bit of time to switch the second projector on, and they've been bumped and everything, make sure the alignment is correct. Let me finish with this concluding remarks, and then we'll try to see these 15 pairs. So, what did we learn today? It is possible to take stereo pairs with a wide base. This is called a hyperstereo, or a narrow base. This is called a hypostereo. That's a very interesting area, and I recommend that you experiment with that in addition to your ordinary photography. Now, digital photography has made it easier to do that, less expensive. You can experiment, you can learn easier, and then you can also align things that are misaligned easier. Now, the Fuji 3D camera has certain functions built in that make this handheld hyperstereo picture taking process easier and more fun. I have to emphasize this fun because, as I said, you can do that with any camera basically. But if it's not fun, or if you don't get this instant feedback, for me, it makes me eager to try it. I can go outside and say, well, let me try this building. I take a regular picture and then a hyperstereo, just for the fun of it. Now, as I said, the emphasis was in the Fuji, but the same principles will apply with any camera, and I really believe that future stereo cameras that we all hope to get will have those functions built in. Okay, now you're going to need polarizing glass. If you don't have, is Ron here? Somebody can pass glass around while I try to switch the projectors. Okay. Now that's an example of a hyperstereo. I was visiting in Athens the new museum of Acropolis. There was this nice building, so I put the Fuji in. I put the Fuji in 3D sequential mode, individual shutter, and then I took this picture, combined a nice building in 3D. Now, one effect of the hyperstereo, by the way, I don't know if you know that, is everything looks like a little miniature model. So people that see this for the first time, not used to stereo, they think that this is a toy. And I had one lady actually argue with me for 10 minutes, telling me that a picture of a hyperstereo, it wasn't a real picture, it was models of houses and trees.
What do they call that? Is that giant?
I think that's the correct term, yes. I mentioned that I like, how can you get rid of the cursor? Anybody knows?
I think it's on.
I don't even see it. Oh, there it is up at
Way
the
to the
top.
top.
There we go. Sliding wants to go back.
Slide to the bottom and all the way to the
Okay.
right.
Now, I'm at the top of Acropolis and I have an overview of Athens. I just, take my pairs like this. People ask, well, how much did you move? I really don't know. I have no idea. I don't try to keep measurements. Maybe I experiment and select the best pair, but even that I rarely do.
Did you move more than 10 feet, you think?
That's about right, 10 feet. Now this picture is from David Starkman. It's a hyperstereo in Los Angeles, I believe, from the police building. There's a description in the first page of my presentation. Now here you can see certain things have moved, especially on the left side. You see those cars, the left trails on the left side. As you mentioned, if you have the patience, you can go with Photoshop and actually eliminate all these little problems in the picture. The small cars. Other than that, you know, very impressive depth.
Those are models.
But George, the other thing you can do is you can add things and copy them.
Yes. This is a hyperstereo clouds from an aeroplane window. Now, I noticed that if you make them black and white and increase the contrast, it starts looking more like art. So, no, it actually looks pretty good. I mean, you know the clouds are white and the sky is blue, so black and white and high contrast make it more interesting in some cases. Now, you notice the different perspective, same thing but from the ground. Now, when you do that from the ground, or even from the air, you know, clouds can move in between themselves, so that will create a problem. If there's a wind, that moves the clouds too. So between your exposures, the clouds have moved, and maybe they moved in a way that you don't want, like up and down, or in the wrong direction. Okay, that's pretty interesting. I mean, I never thought I would take pictures like that before. I mean, there's a hyperstereo of the ground from the plane, I think it was during landing. So here you have to use the minimum. Things change very quickly. And here's another example. These are not perfect examples. By the way, I had the camera since October. I've used it in some trips. I didn't try to improve things. I don't know much. You know, I just got into stereo projection. So you should have the lowest possible expectations from this projection. Now I mentioned that you warm up by taking hyperstereos of the plane. Now I noticed something interesting. Did you see the clouds in the back? Now this is an effect here that we mentioned of the moving clouds. Does anybody really have good stereoscopic vision to see that the clouds are placed in front? Mm-hmm. In front. That means that they were moving, what? In my direction or against my direction? Against, right. They were moving. I didn't see anything moving really. They must have moving quite slow. But even the slowest movement, because our stereoscopic vision is so sensitive, the slowest movement, you will see it in 3D. And this will affect your picture. Does anybody recognize this scene here?
Right out here.
It's right outside of the resort. Yesterday, I skipped out of the room, don't tell anybody, but I skipped one workshop and I went out because it was a sunny day, and that's when I took this picture. Just for the Fuji 3D mode, move, take my chances, and I think it comes out pretty good.
Is that going in the competition?
Yeah, good question. I take some unusual subjects. People don't know why I even photograph these, like big electric towers. I don't know, I'm attracted to those. I was taking this picture, and this lady comes to me and says, "Why are you taking these pictures?" I didn't know what to say. I honestly didn't know what to say because I like taking pictures of big, heavy electrical equipment. Why not?
Security.
Well, that's an example of a hypostereo. Now, my wife was shopping, and I was taking pictures of the displays in the store. Like this example, everything handheld. Or this one, now I'm very close. If I try regular mode, there will be like too much depth in this pair. This is the insect from the insectarium. I entered this in this club competition and I got an award with this, so I was quite pleased. Here, I have a question for you. Look at this picture here. Yeah, this is also outside the hotel. And look at this one, the next one, and tell me which one do you prefer. It's the same subject. This one? You see, no, guess which one is the normal one and which one is the hyper or hypo. I'm not going to take.
Can you AP it?
This is the hyper, so I moved more than the 77 millimeters of the Fuji. Does anybody disagree with that? You say no?
I think
This is the Fuji. Now, this is the Fuji. 77 millimeters of the Fuji. If you try to come close to the flowers, that's what you'll get. Some people like this. They say, wow, I really prefer this. Now, if you try and project this in the stereo field, the huge screen, it might be a little bit too much depth. The bigger you try to project the image, the smaller this stereoscopic deviation should be. So let me go back. In that case, I mean, this looks more flat, obviously, and there is still a lot of depth, though, exactly. And in a big screen, I think this will work better than the other one. But take both and then you decide. I'm trying to see if anything has moved because, you know, no wind, okay, it works fine. Okay, that's all the examples I have for you, and that concludes my presentation.